X-Pro4, X100V replacement, X-T40, X-E5, XS20. Today we're going to talk about all these cameras based on an interview that Fujifilm managers recently gave. But two things first, today it's my birthday, so if you want to make me a present, like, subscribe and hit the notification bell. And we're not going to do it here near the street, but I will bring you to the Göllersee, okay? So let me hike for 35 minutes, see you over there. So here we are at the Göllersee, a very small lake hidden in the forest and very beautiful, not so touristic, very quiet. I'll let you the location down below in case you want to have a moment of peace and you are in my area. Come here. It's wonderful also to have a good swim. So we are here to talk about which sensor future Fujifilm cameras will use based on an interview that Fujifilm managers made with Deep Review, because in that interview they said something very interesting. Fujifilm now considers to have 3 sensors available for their future cameras. There is of course the 40 megapixel X-Trans5 HR high resolution sensor, the stack 26 megapixel X-Trans5 HS, the high speed sensor, and then they also see a future for the 26 megapixel X-Trans4 sensor, and they said depending on which camera it is, they will see which combination fits better, yeah, for that camera, for that particular camera. Let's try to figure out which decisions Fujifilm could make, and we make it in 2 ways. One, I have a survey right now up on FujiRumors where you can vote which sensor you would like in which camera, and I give you these 3 options to vote from, except for one camera, and I will explain later. And second, I will tell you my personal preference for each camera line. So first we have to make a distinction between hybrid cameras of Fujifilm, which are the XH and the XS line, and then the photography first cameras, which are basically all the other cameras. In terms of hybrid cameras, we already have an excellent idea what's going on, because we already have an XH2 and XH2S, and those are the cameras that will always feature the very best and most expensive sensor, simply because in that bigger, beefier body, you have excellent heat dissipation and you can just make every sensor perform at its best. Yeah, the XH2 can shoot 8K, the XH2 has an incredible burst rate. So those are the high-end cameras. They will be simply always remain the very best Fujifilm can offer. And then there is the XS20, and you know based on rumors that it will use the X-Trans4 26 megapixel sensor. And for me this was initially disappointing because I want a 40 megapixel sensor everywhere, but the more I think about it, the more I realize for hybrid cameras, putting a 40 megapixel sensor into such a small body is just an overkill. I mean, you can see on my X-T5, the 40 megapixel sensor in terms of video is already like very limited compared to the XH2. For example, it cannot shoot 8K, or the high quality video modes have a crop in it. So it's just too much for a small body like the XS20 to put in a 40 megapixel, and it's also too much to put in a stacked sensor because that one is very expensive, and the XS20 is supposed to be like a more mid-range camera, so you cannot put a too expensive sensor in it. So from this point of view, the 26 megapixel X-Trans4 sensor is perfect because it will have, in combination with the X-Processor 5, very little rolling shutter, a very fast sensor readout, and you can have some decent high quality modes, video modes without too much heat generation. So I can see it makes a whole lot of sense to use that sensor on the XS20. And now let's talk about the photography first cameras. In general, I would say my personal preference is the 40 megapixel sensor because it is a high resolution sensor and it really lets all the Fujifilm lenses perform at their best. I know not all can resolve 40 megapixel, but every lens will profit from the 40 megapixel sensor. Every lens will get a bit sharper, 34, 35, 37 megapixel, maybe not all 40, but it is a performance boost for every lens. It is also the sensor with the highest dynamic range as measured by photons to photos, and it's just really a beautiful sensor. And now to the X100V. In that case, I would like to have a 40 megapixel sensor. And there are probably only 2 reasons why I would think a 26 megapixel X-Trans4 sensor would make sense. The first one would be if the lens itself would not be capable to resolve more than 26 megapixel, then putting a 40 megapixel sensor would not make much sense. But considering that the lens on the X100V is relatively new, I think it is sharp enough to resolve all or most of those 40 megapixels. So, and the other reasons maybe to make it a bit cheaper, because there are lots of young people right now attracted to the X100V system to the X100 system, and keeping the price a bit lower for young people who probably don't have the financial means to buy expensive cameras could also make sense, because the X100 line is kind of gateway camera into the X system, so make it a bit cheaper so more people can buy it and discover the X system and then buy into other cameras too. But I remain to my point, I want a 40 megapixel sensor also on the X100V replacement. And then there is a special camera, the X-Pro4. I told you that Fujifilm will probably experiment around with that line. And so in that case, on the survey I will put on FujiRumors, I will give you to vote the 3 options that we already discussed, but also a 4th option, which is none of the sensors above, because if they're going to experiment with that line, they could also experiment with a sensor, for example, a monochrome sensor or an X-band sensor. Yeah. So I will give you the option to vote also on a different type of sensor. Personally, also in that case, I want a 40 megapixel sensor because it's a photography first camera, unless they really want to experiment around with other choices. For example, if you would put in the 26 megapixel stacked sensor, and you can do that in the X-Pro4 because it's their so-called luxury line, they say, so price is not an issue, you can go expensive. If you put in the stacked sensor, then you can make other choices, for example, like removing the mechanical shutter and then put in IBIS or so. So for that camera, for the X-Pro4, you get also 4 options, sensor options to vote from in the survey that I will put on FujiRumors. The link is down below. And now to the more base models, the X-E5. Since I'm in the market for an X-E5, I want to replace my X-E3 with an X-E5, if that camera would ever come, because I have no idea, I have no rumors, just speculation. Then I want a 40 megapixel sensor in it. Yes, it will make the whole camera a bit more expensive, but I want a 40 megapixel sensor, so I vote 40 megapixel sensor. And if somebody of you says, yeah, but 26 is cheaper, is more better for a baseline model, then I understand it, but I don't want it. I want 40 megapixel sensor. And the same is valid also for an eventual X-T40 whenever, if that would come, yeah? So for those, I'm kind of torn. I prefer the 40 megapixel sensor, but I would understand if they go for the 26 megapixel X-Trans4 sensor. So these are my preferences, these are my speculations and my wishes. Let me know yours in the comments, and also go over to FujiRumors where you find a survey where you can vote on them. And that was it already from the Gölase. Now I go home, and I wish you a wonderful day, and like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and see you in the next video. Goodbye. So we are here to talk about which sensor